My name is James Karuki. I'm a third-generation farmer in the Rift Valley, about 40 kilometers from the Masai Mara. My grandfather cleared this land in 1952. My father expanded it, and for the last 25 years, I've worked these 500 acres, watching the sun rise over the same acacia trees my grandfather planted with his own hands. People ask me what it's like living this close to the wild. The truth? You learn the rules fast, or you don't survive. Rule number 1. Respect the boundary. There's a fence, electric, 8 feet tall, that separates my property from the reserve. On my side, there's order. Crops in neat rows. Livestock secured at dusk. A life built on routine and discipline. On their side? Pure, untamed Africa. I've seen lion prides from a distance more times than I can count. Magnificent creatures. Terrifying, yes, but also beautiful in a way that makes you understand why ancient people worshipped them. I've watched them hunt. I've heard their roars shake the night air so powerfully that my windows rattle. But I never interfered, never approached, never broke the invisible contract between their world and mine. My days follow a rhythm that hasn't changed in decades. Up at dawn, check the northern fence line first. That's where the terrain gets rough, where elephants sometimes push through looking for water. Then I tend the maize fields, secure the goats, repair whatever needs fixing. By sunset, I'm back at the house, locking doors, making sure every animal is accounted for. It's a good life. A simple life. The kind of life where you know exactly what to expect, day after day. Until 3 days ago, I was doing my evening rounds, checking the northern fence as the sun started dropping toward the horizon. That golden hour, when everything glows like it's been dipped in honey. The air was cooling. The birds were settling. Everything was exactly as it should be. And then I heard it. A sound that made every hair on my body stand up. High-pitched. Desperate. The kind of cry that cuts through your chest and grabs your heart before your brain can even process what it is. It was a young animal. In distress. Serious distress. I stood there frozen listening. Every instinct I'd developed over 25 years screamed at me. Call the wildlife authority. Wait for the professionals. Do not, under any circumstances, approach a wild animal alone. Especially not in the evening, when predators are most active. But that cry, it wasn't stopping. It was getting weaker. More desperate. I pulled out my phone. Dialed the ranger station. No signal. The northern section has always been a dead zone. Something about the valley topography. I'd have to walk back to the house, make the call, wait for them to arrive. At least 45 minutes. Maybe an hour. That animal didn't have an hour. I looked toward the sound. About 200 meters into the scrub, just past where my fence had collapsed last month during the storms. I'd been meaning to fix it. I'd told myself I'd get to it next week. The crying was fading now. Whatever was out there was losing strength. I made a decision. The kind of decision that goes against every rule, every bit of training, every ounce of common sense I'd accumulated. I grabbed my toolkit from the truck, checked my flashlight, and started walking toward that sound. Toward the collapsed fence. Toward whatever was waiting in the gathering darkness. I found him tangled in barbed wire, about 10 meters past the broken fence line. A lion cub, maybe 4 months old. His hind legs were twisted in the wire, bleeding from deep lacerations. His underbelly was torn open where he'd thrashed trying to free himself. The ground around him was dark with blood. When he saw me, he didn't growl, didn't try to attack. He just looked at me with these eyes, these amber eyes filled with pain and terror, and something that looked heartbreakingly like hope. I've delivered calves. I've stitched up horses. I've pulled barbed wire out of just about every kind of farm animal you can imagine. But this was different. This was a predator. A wild animal whose mother could be anywhere within 1,000 meters, following his cries. An animal whose entire pride might be searching for him right now. And here I was, standing in the open, completely exposed, about to put my hands on him. The smart thing would have been to walk away. But smart and right aren't always the same thing. I knelt down slowly, talking to him in that low voice I use with frightened animals. Easy now. Easy. I'm going to help you, but you need to stay still. He whimpered. A sound no predator should make. A sound that was pure helplessness. My hands were shaking as I opened my veterinary kit. I always keep one in the truck for livestock emergencies. Inside, bandages, antiseptic, sutures, and a sedative, xylazine meant for cattle. The cub thrashed again, and blood sprayed across my shirt. Fresh lacerations opened up. If I didn't sedate him, he'd kill himself trying to escape. but I had no idea what dosage to use. Too much would stop his heart. Too little would do nothing. I calculated his weight. Maybe 15 kilos. I drew up what I hoped was a safe dose, and prayed I wasn't about to accidentally kill him. The injection went into his shoulder. He yelped, a sound that carried across the evening air like a gunshot, and I froze, listening for answering roars, for the sound of paws on dry earth, for any sign that I was about to die. Silence. Just the wind through the acacia trees. Just my own breathing, loud in my ears. Just the pounding of my heart against my ribs. The sedative took effect slowly. His struggles became weaker. His eyes started to droop. Within 5 minutes, he was unconscious, his small chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Now came the hard part. The barbed wire had twisted around his legs so tightly, it had cut to the bone in places. Each time I tried to unwrap it, the barbs caught on tissue and muscle. I had to work in near darkness now. The sun had dropped below the horizon, and I was working by flashlight, held between my teeth. Every minute I spent there increased the danger. Lions hunt at night. They travel in prides. If his family found me like this, crouched over their cub with blood on my hands, they wouldn't ask questions. They'd act. My hands cramped. My back screamed from being hunched over. Sweat poured down my face despite the cooling air. And through it all I kept listening. Listening for the sound of approaching death. It took 40 minutes to free him. 40 minutes that felt like hours. When the last strand of wire finally came away, I almost collapsed from relief. The cub was a mess. Deep puncture wounds. Lacerations that would need stitches. He'd lost a lot of blood. But he was alive. His heart was still beating against my palm when I checked his pulse. I wrapped him in my jacket and lifted him carefully. He was heavier than I expected. Dead weight in my arms as I started the walk back to my property, my flashlight beam bouncing with each step. The barn was the only option. I couldn't take him into the house. If he woke up aggressive, I'd be trapped. The barn had a secure pen I use for sick livestock. I laid him on fresh hay, set up water and raw meat from my freezer, and started treating his wounds under the work lights. I woke to silence. Not normal silence. Not the usual morning chorus of birds and insects and the distant sounds of the reserve waking up. This was a different kind of silence. The kind that makes your skin crawl. The kind that means something is very, very wrong. I lay there for a moment, trying to identify what had pulled me from sleep. The light coming through my window was that soft, early dawn gray. Maybe 5:30. The air was cool. Everything should have been peaceful. But it wasn't. I got out of bed and walked to the window. And my entire body turned to ice. They were sitting in a perfect semicircle around my house. 15 lions. 15 full-grown lions, arranged like they'd been positioned by some unseen hand. All of them facing my front door. All of them completely still. Their golden eyes caught the first rays of sunlight, turning them into points of amber fire in the gray morning light. At the center sat the largest male I'd ever seen. His mane was so dark it was almost black, full and thick around his massive head and shoulders. He had to weigh over 500 pounds. To his right and left, 5 lionesses, each one easily 300 pounds of pure muscle. At the edges of the semicircle, younger lions. Adolescents, maybe 2 years old, but still deadly. They weren't moving. Weren't making a sound. Just watching my house. Watching me. My mind went completely blank. This wasn't possible. Lions don't behave like this. They don't organize themselves into formations. They don't sit in patient vigils outside human homes. This went against everything I knew about their behavior. And yet, there they were. I stood at that window for 15 minutes. 15 eternal minutes where I couldn't move, couldn't think, could barely breathe. I was frozen by a terror, so pure it felt like my entire body had turned to stone. They'd come for the cub. Of course they had. They'd tracked his scent. They'd followed his blood trail. And now they were here, waiting for me. Waiting to reclaim their family member. Waiting to punish the human who'd taken him. I was going to die. That thought was crystal clear in my mind. I was going to walk out that door, and they were going to tear me apart. There would be nothing left but scraps of clothing and bone fragments. They'd find my body scattered across the yard, a lesson about what happens when you break the rules. But the cub was in my barn. Wounded. Helpless. He needed to get back to his family, or he'd die. The decision formed in my mind before I could question it. Before logic could intervene and tell me how utterly insane it was. I was going to open that door. I was going to walk out there, and I was going to take them to their cub. My legs shook as I moved to the front door. My hand trembled on the handle. Every survival instinct I possessed was screaming at me to stay inside, to call for help, to do anything except what I was about to do. I opened the door. The cool morning air hit my face. It smelled like dust and grass and something else, something wild and musky that I recognized as the scent of the lions themselves. They didn't move. 15 pairs of eyes locked onto me. 15 predators, watching my every breath. I stepped outside. Still, they didn't move. The male's tail twitched once, the only sign that they were living creatures and not some impossible statue formation. I started walking. Slow steps. Steady breathing. Walking toward the barn where the cub was resting. Every nerve in my body was on fire. Every cell was screaming danger. But I kept walking. And then they moved. All 15 of them rose to their feet in perfect unison. One coordinated motion, like they were connected by invisible strings. The sound of it, the rustling of grass, the soft thuds of massive paws on earth, stopped my heart. This is it, I thought. This is where I die. But they didn't charge. They didn't attack. They followed me, at a distance of exactly 20 feet, maintaining that precise gap as I walked toward the barn. When I walked faster, they walked faster. When I slowed, they slowed. It was the most surreal experience of my entire life, being escorted by 15 lions like I was some kind of dignitary under their protection. I reached the barn door. My hand shook so badly I could barely work the latch. Behind me, I could hear them breathing, hear the soft sounds of their movement, feel the weight of their collective gaze. I opened the door and stepped inside. The cub was awake, alert. He'd eaten some of the meat I'd left. When he saw me, he made a small mewing sound, nothing like the desperate cries from last night, but a sound of recognition. And then he saw the pride, saw them through the open barn door. His mewing became urgent. Excited. He tried to stand on his bandaged legs, wobbled, fell, tried again. The largest lioness broke from the formation. She moved toward the barn with purpose, and I pressed myself against the wall, giving her space, preparing for whatever was about to happen. She entered the barn, went straight to the cub, began sniffing him thoroughly, checking his wounds, her nose moving over every bandage, every injury. The cub was crying now, happy sounds, pressing against her massive body, trying to nurse. And then she turned her head toward me. Our eyes met. For 5 seconds, 5 infinite, eternal seconds, this lioness and I looked at each other. I could see intelligence in those amber eyes. Recognition. Understanding. She knew what I'd done. She knew I'd saved her cub's life. And then, she bowed her head. It was a clear, deliberate gesture. Her massive head lowered slowly until it was nearly touching the ground. She held it there for a moment, then raised it again. My vision blurred with tears. I couldn't help it. I was witnessing something that shouldn't exist. Something that science would say was impossible. But it was happening. One by one, the other lions entered the barn. One by one, they approached the cub, sniffed him, checked his condition. And one by one, every single lion turned toward me and bowed their head in that same deliberate gesture. The adolescents. The other lionesses. Even the massive male with the dark mane, he entered last, his shoulders barely fitting through the barn door, and he too looked at me with those amber eyes and lowered his great head in acknowledgement. 15 times. 15 separate gestures of recognition, of gratitude, of something I had no name for. The pride gathered around the cub then, nuzzling him gently. The lionesses licked his wounds. The male touched his nose to the cub's head. They were checking him, comforting him, telling him he was safe now. And I stood there, tears streaming down my face, watching this impossible moment unfold in my barn as the sun rose outside, painting everything in gold. After several minutes, the lionesses began guiding the cub toward the door. He could walk now, though he limped heavily on his bandaged leg. The pride formed a protective circle around him, moving slowly to accommodate his pace. As they passed me, the cub stopped, looked up at me with those amber eyes that had held such terror last night, made a small sound, soft, gentle, almost like a purr. Then they were gone, moving across my yard, through the gap in the fence, back toward the reserve, back to their world. I walked outside and watched them go. Watched until they disappeared into the tall grass. Watched until even the sound of their movement faded into the morning air. I stood alone in my yard as the sun climbed higher. Stood there with tears drying on my face and my heart pounding in my chest and the absolute certainty that I had just witnessed something beyond explanation. Something miraculous. I don't know how long I stood there after they left. Could have been 10 minutes. Could have been an hour. Time had stopped meaning anything. When I finally moved, it was to look down at the ground around my house. And there it was, the evidence that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. Massive paw prints in the soft earth, forming that perfect semicircle around my front door. 15 sets of prints, each one clear and distinct in the morning light. My hands were still shaking as I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. I don't know why. Some instinct that told me I'd need proof, that no one would believe me without it. I was right. I called my neighbor Marcus. He's a veterinarian, runs a practice in the nearest town. When I explained what happened, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "James," he said finally, "have you been drinking? I'm completely sober. Just please come. Look at the evidence." He arrived an hour later, skepticism written all over his face. But when he saw the paw prints, measured them, examined the pattern, his expression changed. "This is..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "This is organized behavior. Coordinated. Lions don't do this." "I know." We went to the barn together. The cub's blood was still on the hay where I'd treated him. The medical supplies were scattered across my workbench. The raw meat was mostly gone. The cub had eaten well before his family arrived. Marcus examined everything with the careful attention of a scientist. "The wounds you described, the sutures you did, this animal would have died without intervention." "I know. And you're telling me the entire pride came here. 15 lions. Sat outside your house. Then bowed to you. I know how it sounds." He looked at me for a long moment. "I've been a wildlife vet for 23 years. I've seen a lot of unusual animal behavior. But this, if this really happened the way you're describing, it's unprecedented." My phone rang. The Wildlife Authority, finally returning my midnight call. I explained the situation to the ranger, a man named Joseph Kamani, who I'd known for years. He said he'd come immediately. Joseph arrived by noon, bringing another ranger with him. They examined everything, the paw prints, the barn, my medical supplies. They took photographs, made measurements, asked me to describe the events in detail 3 separate times, looking for inconsistencies in my story. And then Joseph told me something I didn't know. "This pride," he said, pointing toward the reserve, "they've been denayed within 200 meters of your property for the last 12 years. Before that, it was their mother's pride in the same location. These lions have lived their entire lives listening to your farm, your voice, your tractor, the rhythm of your daily work." He showed me photographs on his tablet, tracking data, GPS coordinates from collared lions. The matriarch, the large lioness you described, she was born on the reserve boundary. She's heard you calling your livestock every morning for her entire life. To her, you're not a stranger. You're part of the landscape, part of the environment she considers safe. "But the bowing," I said, "the coordinated behavior. How do you explain that?" Joseph was quiet for a moment. "Lions have extraordinary memory. Recent studies show they can distinguish between individual humans based on sight, sound, even scent. They can recognize who poses threats and who doesn't. But this," he gestured at the paw prints, "this level of what appears to be gratitude behavior, it's not documented in scientific literature." The other ranger, a younger woman named Aking, spoke up. "There was a case in Botswana, 2019. A research team published findings in the Journal of Wildlife Behavior about a male lion who repeatedly brought food to a researcher who'd treated his infected paw. The behavior lasted for 3 weeks. But 15 lions," Joseph said. "Coordinated acknowledgement. That's different. That's unprecedented." As we were talking, I heard a vehicle approach. It was David. He runs the worker cottages on the eastern section of my property. He got out of his truck looking agitated. "Mr. Karuki," he said, "I need to show you something." He pulled out his phone and played a video. It was shaky, shot from a distance, but it was clear enough. 15 lions walking away from my barn, surrounding a limping cub. And there, in the middle of the frame, was me standing in my yard watching them go. "I woke up early to check the irrigation system," David explained. "I saw them walking away. I recorded the last 43 seconds. I didn't know what else to do." Joseph took the phone, watched the video 3 times in complete silence. Then he looked at me with something like awe in his eyes. "James," he said quietly, "do you understand what you've documented here? This isn't just unusual behavior. This is evidence of cognitive and emotional capacity in lions that we've never proven before. This is..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Aking was already making phone calls. Within an hour, 3 wildlife biologists from Nairobi University were on their way. By evening, my farm was swarming with researchers, all examining the evidence, all watching David's video on repeat, all trying to explain what had happened. Dr. Sarah Mbeki, a behavioral ecologist I'd seen on television, sat with me in my living room as the sun set. Lions are intelligent, she said. We know they have complex social structures. We know they can form bonds outside their species. There are documented cases of lions adopting other animals, even protecting them. But this is different. How? This was recognition. Acknowledgement. They understood that you saved their cub, and they responded with what we can only interpret as gratitude. They created a formation, a ceremony almost, to show their appreciation. That requires not just intelligence, but theory of mind. The ability to understand that you, a member of a different species, had intentions and motivations that benefited their family. She showed me her research on her laptop. Studies of lion cognition. Experiments on problem solving and social learning. Everything we know about lions suggests they're capable of this, she said. But we've never seen it documented so clearly. Your story, David's video, it changes everything. The meat supply in the barn was untouched, they noted. The cub had been fed by his pride after they left. The bandages I'd applied were still in place. The pride had been careful not to damage them during the reunion. Every detail supported the story. What happens now? I asked Joseph before he left that evening. Now, he smiled. Now your life changes. This story is going to spread. People will want to interview you. Scientists will want to study the pride. You're going to become famous, James. The farmer who earned a lion's gratitude. I didn't do it for fame. I did it because he was dying. I know, Joseph said. That's exactly why it matters. He was right about everything. The story spread like wildfire. First the local news, then national coverage. Within a week, international media was calling. The BBC, National Geographic, Animal Planet. Everyone wanted to interview the farmer who'd been honored by lions. David's video went viral. Over 40 million views in the first month. People around the world watched those 43 seconds of footage. Watched the pride walking away with their rescued cub. Watched me standing alone in my yard. And felt something shift in their understanding of the natural world. Wildlife biologists from 3 universities came to study the pride. They set up observation posts. Tracked movement patterns. Documented behavior. Dr. Mbeki established a research program specifically focused on the cognitive abilities demonstrated by that pride on that morning. Your experience, she wrote in her published paper, provides evidence that the boundaries between human consciousness and animal consciousness are far more fluid than previously understood. What you witnessed wasn't instinct. It was rational thought, emotional recognition, and moral acknowledgement. It was by any definition gratitude. My farm became something different after that. I worked with conservation groups to convert 100 acres of my property into a protected wildlife corridor. Created water sources that the prides could access safely. Built observation platforms where researchers could study lion behavior without disturbance. I became a consultant, helping other farmers in the region learn to coexist peacefully with predators. Teaching them what I'd learned, that respect and compassion can bridge the gap between human and wild. But the most important moment came 18 months later. I was doing my evening rounds, checking that same northern fence line where this whole story began. The sun was dropping toward the horizon, painting the world in shades of gold. Everything was peaceful, routine, the way life should be. And then I saw movement in the tall grass of the reserve. She emerged slowly, the matriarch. I recognized her immediately. That massive build, that confident way of moving. But she wasn't alone this time. 3 cubs tumbled out of the grass behind her, playing and wrestling with each other. Her new litter, born after the rescue, born into a world where one of their siblings had been saved by a human. She stopped about 50 meters away. The evening light caught her golden coat, turning her into something almost mythical. Her cubs played around her feet, oblivious to my presence. And then she looked at me. Our eyes met across that distance. There was no need for gestures this time. No need for bowing or ceremony. The understanding between us was complete, permanent, unspoken but absolute. She held my gaze for just a moment that felt like a lifetime, a moment that contained everything, the terror of that night, the miracle of that morning, the bond that had formed between 2 beings who should have been enemies. Then she turned, gathered her cubs with soft chuffing sounds, and disappeared back into the tall grass. I stood there as the sun set, watching the place where she'd vanished. And I understood something fundamental about the world. Compassion is a language that transcends species. When you act with pure intention to help another living being, without expectation of reward, without thought of recognition, you create bonds that defy scientific explanation. That morning, surrounded by 15 lions, I didn't just save one life. I proved that the space between human and wild isn't as vast as we believe. Kindness is recognized by all creatures who have ever needed it, and that recognition can change everything. It changed me. It changed how I see my place in this ecosystem. It changed how I understand the animals I share this land with. 3 days ago, I broke the cardinal rule of living near the wild. I interfered. I made myself part of their world. And in doing so, I learned the most important lesson of my life. We're not as separate as we think. The boundaries we draw between human and animal, between civilized and wild, they're artificial, created by fear and misunderstanding. But when you reach across that boundary with an open heart and willing hands, something miraculous can happen. 15 lions taught me that. 15 lions who sat in perfect formation outside my house as dawn broke. 15 lions who bowed their heads in acknowledgement. 15 lions who showed me that gratitude, love, and recognition exist in hearts far wilder than my own. That's not a story about animals behaving like humans. That's a story about recognizing that the emotions we think make us special, compassion, gratitude, love, they've always existed in the natural world. We were just too afraid, too arrogant to see it. I see it now. Every morning, when I check the northern fence line. Every evening when I hear roars echoing across the reserve. Every time I catch a glimpse of golden eyes watching from the tall grass. They're not my friends. They're not tame. They're wild predators living wild lives. But there's understanding between us now. Respect that goes both ways. A bond created by one desperate night and one impossible morning. And that, I've learned, is worth more than all the safety in the world.